our plan is to talk about co-teaching in the content areas in the classroom and what those co-teaching practices look like for us as special education teachers, but also for regular education or general education teachers. So our idea is today that we're going to share with you some models of that, and so we're going to allow you to participate. What we're going to be asking you to do as we work through these models is if you've printed off your structured notes page, you have 3 questions that will frame what you were asking you to do while you watch the model of those videos. And the one is that you're going to look at what instructional strategies do you see occurring while we're talking about the instruction. The second thing is what is the general education teacher doing? And then the third thing is, what is the role of the special educator? So we're going to just take a look and give you some practice opportunity of that around that. And so we're going to begin with math, then we're going to look at that in reading, and then we're going to have an example for social studies. So we have one for elementary, middle, and high school grades. On the screen you'll see right now we're talking about co-teaching, and so these are the most familiar. We hear these and we talk about these co-teaching approaches. And so I'm just going to briefly talk about that. We have team teaching, and team teaching is when you have 2 teachers together. You'll see a representation of that today. We'll have parallel teaching. You'll also see an example of that today. You'll see station teaching, and that's where you have stations and each teacher is leading a station. And then we'll have alternative teaching example. And then we'll have one more that's one teach, one observe. The most frequently used and recommended by the research is parallel teaching, and that's when 2 teachers are teaching the same content, but they're delivering that content in 2 different ways. The station teaching is when that you have a teacher, a regular ed teacher, a special education teacher, both are leading a station and they're leading that instruction. And then you have an independent station. We think about that when we think about Mr. John O'Connor, who wrote Good Instruction, Great Achievement, because what he says is if you have 2 people in that classroom, both of those people should be responsible for leading and delivering instruction while they're in there. And so that's the good thing, is we think about how do we use co-teaching and how do we have co-teaching be effective in our classrooms. And it requires some planning, some organizing, and putting things together. But we hope that today you'll get to see some examples of each of those. So that's our plan for today. The next thing I'm going to ask you to do is we have, if you've got your structured notes page printed out, we're going to look at this next thing right here. So we're going to ask you, as we're transitioning, let's talk about what the roles and responsibilities are of co-teachers. So we're going to ask you to look through this list and look at the responsibility, and you decide, mark it on your structured notes page or just mark it on a post-it note if you have. But let's talk about what is the role of the general ed teacher, what is the role of the special education teacher, what opportunities are there shared responsibilities, and then what other times would we use paraeducators, volunteers. Let's think about our Save the Children folks. But so look at this list of responsibilities that we have in a classroom, and you decide if you think it's a general ed teacher, a special education teacher, or shared responsibility. And I'll give you 1 minute to look over that list. Okay, I know that maybe you didn't get through all the lists, but let's just look real quickly at the responsibility and roles of the general ed teacher and the special education teacher. So, introducing the partnership to the class. Let's think about that. Would that be a general ed teacher, you think, or would that be a special education teacher responsibility? What do you all think?
General ed.
Okay, it could be a general ed and they're introducing it to the classroom. Absolutely. It could be shared. Absolutely. Absolutely. What about planning the lesson? Who should be planning the lesson?
But shared with both general ed and special ed.
Shared. So shared. Yeah, shared. Okay. So we do think shared because there's some responsibilities. We have to know what our role is as we plan those lessons. How about who identifies the needed accommodations for students? Who shares that information about student accommodations?
Special ed teacher.
Right. So the special ed teacher is going to have that expert knowledge about that. What about, so we have 2 questions, one around accommodations, but then one accommodations specifically for special education students. So that would be something we'd have to, look at that one, because our special ed teachers are the experts on the accommodations and supports for students.
You also have 504 students.
And whose responsibility is for that? And what Dean said is we also have those 504 students that are in those classrooms too. Right, and so that may be the general ed, but that would also be something that they may lean on the special education teacher's expertise to get some information for them. But preparing accommodated materials for all students, but then how about for special ed students?
Be the special ed teacher.
You could be the special ed teacher for that. But how about preparing accommodated materials for all students? Sometimes, as general education teachers, we might not have all the ideas about how to accommodate. So sometimes we have to, that's a great opportunity for a partnership too, because special ed folks know partnerships on they know accommodations. General ed teachers know content, so it makes a great partnership when you have them having that conversation back and forth. And that's what you'll see today as we kind of model these, is that conversation back and forth. Because it doesn't take lots of time to plan lessons, but you do have to have some conversations. Also, we're looking at appropriate curricular modifications as determined by the IEP. Who would be doing that? It could be a special ed teacher, but do general ed teachers have access to IEPs and need to understand?
That's what I was gonna say, you have to access them to IEP so they can see the accommodations and all that as well.
Right, so it could be a shared responsibility. So the special ed teacher is going to make sure that we are getting those curricular modifications, but the general ed teacher is going to have to be responsible for planning those, because the special ed teacher might not be in there all the time, so they need to be aware of those. But they do have access to the IEP. Let's go ahead and, the next one is around differentiation. And who would be responsible for helping with instructional materials and differentiating instruction?
That could actually be shared.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the shared.
Yeah.
I think that's certainly something.
So I think I agree. And even whole group instruction, that's the next one. Who's responsible for that?
Shared.
Yeah.
It is shared, because if we know what the research says is that more effective instruction occurs when you have two highly qualified professionals sharing responsibility in the delivery of instruction. And you'll see an example of this. If Stephanie models a math lesson and she is the content expert in mathematics and I am not the content expert in mathematics, then I'm going to have to learn what role can I have to serve in that instruction, and how am I going to do that? Because I may have to learn some of that. I may have to go in there and learn some of that. I may have to learn how to do a skill or a strategy so I can share it with students, so I could lead a small group. And I may have to talk to Stephanie about that, or I may have to get some more information on that, because my expertise is not in mathematics. But that doesn't mean that I can't provide supports for students. I have to learn and adapt to that. So, but whole group instruction can be a shared responsibility. We're talking about instruction through station teaching, parallel teaching, and that one kind of gives you a cheat sheet on that, because it is a shared responsibility, right? It's going to take more than one person to be able to do those things. The other one is, looking at grading student work, looking at student work for special education. Those are responsibilities. Regular ed and special education teachers need to know what's happening with student performance and their targets and assessments and formative assessment. But special ed teachers have to know about student classroom performance, because they're progress monitoring their student performance, so they have to know that too. So.
It's also good when you go to write that present level to be able to compare to their peers. So it's good to have that information back there. Is how is all students doing in the classroom compared to my student?
Right.
Is it taking him longer? That goes into that extended time too.
That's an excellent point. So how is my student performing in comparison of the other kids in that same grade? Are they significantly below, or what are they requiring? Much more extended time? Are they requiring more intensive intervention or specially designed instruction with strategies? Do they need smaller chunks, more repetition, additional practice time? So we think about all those things, but we have to be talking about that, because if we're not talking about it, we don't know the answer. So those are all important things to think about. So also things about grading, that's important about student work, but conferencing we're talking about with all parents, and then parents with students with disabilities. So special ed teachers are working with teachers in conferences, particularly for students with disabilities, because if we're having a conference or an admissions and release committee meeting or an ARC meeting, we have to be having those conversations, and we have to have a general ed teacher by requirement to participate in those meetings, Therefore, we have to have those conversations with the general ed folks about what's happening. Classroom management is another one, and I'm kind of just skipping through them. And behavior plans. Well, you know, classroom management can be what? What do y'all think? Is that a shared? Is that a
I
particular?
think it's shared.
It's shared.
I think it's a
Or it needs
shared
to be
responsibility,
shared.
right? Because, and you'll see that today too. We'll have an example of that because the special education teacher can help support that through, you know, some of the co-teaching strategies about how we're tracking and recording behavior and how we're tracking and following what's happening on a student's behavior plan. So those were just some examples, but the idea is that we think about what the role is for general ed and special education teachers and how that most of those, we have a conversation, would you all agree, that are shared responsibilities, that we all have a, something to contribute. So once I heard that we talk about a general ed teacher is the content specialist, but the special education teacher is the learning process specialist. And so when you put both of those together, that's a great force to be able to provide for students. And those students who are in the gap or those intervention kids get some incidental benefit from having that special ed teacher and that regular education teacher. So it really helps all the kids in the class. And you're going to see an example of that today, how we can even use those two people to provide an enrichment for those students who are advanced in that class. So we can use these strategies not just to remediate or catch up those special ed kids who are behind, but we can use this instructional strategies and these practices with co-teaching to really touch more kids more effectively. And so I'm going to turn it over now to Stephanie, and she's going to talk us through the math. We're going to talk about a math lesson.
No, back one, please. So the math lesson we're going to talk about today actually has several different things going on in it. And the two that we're going to really hone in on, I guess to say, is team teaching and parallel teaching. With team teaching, it's been known that it's two teachers, one brain basically, and they're working together to teach the class. With team teaching, the good thing about that is we are both sharing all the responsibilities in the classroom with instruction and also with the classroom management and those kind of things. So we're both going to be fully engaged, and we're going to be working together to make sure all students are getting the understanding of the learning. Now remember, I said this is both fully engaged in the instruction, so we both have to have a good understanding and content knowledge. So in this case, I would want to make sure as the regular ed teacher that Dion understands the content and she has strategies that can back up each student, those kind of things for the teaching. So in our case, can you advance the slides? I don't think we can we? In our case, we're going to talk today kind of about a 6th grade lesson, and we're going to talk about rational numbers. And we are going to work with just integers today. And what does the integers look like? And so at the beginning of our lesson, we would, I'm sure she didn't have it turned on. Can you move on then? Thank you. At the beginning of our lesson for the team teaching, this is what we would do. We would actually start out with a bell ringer, and I would be distributing out the bell ringer, and this would be the bell ringer that I would give out. And then Dion's going to be walking around for a set of students. I'm going to be walking around for a set of students, and during that time, I'm assisting any student who has difficulty. Not only am I discussing the difficulty levels that are going on with the students or prompting them to the next part, Dion's doing the same thing over here. She may have to sit with a student for a little while. I may have to sit with a student for a little while. We're making no difference in what students we're working with, right? At this point. So we're team teaching and we're going through. Now, after that, the students have completed their bell ringer. Dion's going to take over, and she is actually going to discuss the answers for this bell ringer. And while she's doing that, I'm walking around and I'm writing down, just real quick, what I see that each student's got. So she's doing the discussion part at this point. I'm walking around and I'm doing a formative assessment for those students in the classroom, so we know that they understand this point. Now, at this part, we're going to probably say, okay, we need to discuss some things, and we're going to talk about some new vocabulary today for our students. So, in our team teaching situation, Dion is going to actually be our note taker in the team teaching situation, and I'm going to be talking about the words that we're going to go over. So I'm going to discuss some vocabulary today. So, as you guys know, we're talking this week about integers. Can anybody tell me what they know about integers? Chesty's got big eyes over here. That's not good. Who can tell me something about an integer? So, Dan, can you put integers there for us, please? Does anybody know what an integer is? I picked the wrong group, guys. No.
It's a number.
It's a number. Good. What kind of number?
Got positive and negative.
It's got positive and negative. So put these for characteristics, please. We're not going to start on a Freyer model where we typically start, because I like starting with characteristics. If I know the characteristics of something, then I can create a definition. So I typically like starting there. So we know it's a number, but what kind of number is it? It's a whole number. So let's put a whole number on there. What else do we know about some characteristics of an integer? Anybody else got anything? Is zero. Zero is an integer. Anybody else have something?
Just like you said, they could be positive or negative.
Positives or negatives, okay. So now that we know some characteristics, let's talk about some examples down here. What's an example of a whole number? 4. Anybody else?
Negative.
-4, I like that. What else?
100.
100, that's a good one. So now we've got some examples. Now let's talk about some non-examples. What's a non-example? 1/2. 1/2, good, Chesty's got this. What's another one? 0.5, we're using a decimal, or 5/10. What's another one?
1 3/4.
1 3/4. Got it. And the other one is the square root of 2. Let's put that up there because you guys have seen square roots at this point. Yeah? She kind of looks at me. Okay, here we go. So now that we've done this, we've got examples, we've got non-examples. Let's talk about what a definition could be. A definition of an integer is just what? What are they?
They're numbers.
They're whole numbers.
Whole numbers.
Whole numbers that are
Not a fraction.
Positive.
positive and negatives. So there's just a good definition, and or we could say it's positives and their opposites, right? We can do that. We're going to say positives and negatives. Now the key to that again is whole numbers. Now for our image down here, I like this part because I always like drawings, and Anita Archer says to make drawings as much as possible. So let's draw a number line real quickly through there. And typically I'd have my students also creating this Freyer model. And we're going to, of course, put our 0. Now let's talk about where negative numbers lie on a number line. When you're looking at a number line, negative numbers lie which way, left or right?
Left.
Left. So let's put a couple of tick marks.
Okay, so we'll put some tick marks
We're
on
going
the
to put some
side.
tick marks. Let's put -1, -2, -3. And then, of course, on the right, we're going to put 1, 2, 3, known as positive numbers. So this is a way that we can do team teaching, right? Dion's here. She's being our note taker for the time. Our students who need that extra assistance with note taking is being helped, right? And we can provide some of our students in the room who may need a little extra support with part of this already filled in. And we would already have this discussion, and Dion's like, I know the students who need part of it filled in. So these are the students. And she would go ahead and she would supply that for our students who need it. And so this is a good way for us to do. I love Freyer models for mathematics because it gets all the components for teaching vocabulary that our students need for mathematics, especially when we added this image line in.
And so I like that part because my students that are visual learners, but all students, that visual helps me connect back to that.
You have LD kids in there that may have auditory processing problems, that visuals are real,
Absolutely.
real.
Absolutely,
Technical.
yeah. That visual is really a good key. And typically I would have them, if you have a Frayer model that does not have the image part on it, down here somewhere in non-examples, I have them to divide, and one side is just the abstract, which is just, you know, the symbols, and then the other side is an actual visual for them. So that helps. Same thing with on examples too, so that they're getting both. So that's important. Okay, so can we advance?
Yes.
Woohoo. The next thing that we're going to do is some parallel teaching. And so if we're talking about parallel teaching, that's basically Dion and I are teaching the same exact content, but our students are divided up equally among us. So I will have some special ed students in my group. I will have some very gifted and talented students, the average students, that kind of thing. Same thing over here, she's going to have. The thing is, when I was going around and doing my formative assessment, I probably realized who needed a little bit extra support, or I know the kids now who need that visual, okay? And she's going to provide a lot more of the visual than I'm going to provide today. We have gifted and talented kids who need the visual, right? So the kids who need visual, she's going to provide for. And so we're going to split our room that way today. Now, Dion here has hers, and we're going to teach about integers. Keep in mind, we're teaching this at the same time. This is consecutive. We had what we called pods. Do y'all remember pod units? Well, we had pods at my school, and the cool thing was math went on at the same time every day. And so I would have a teacher over here who was teaching math, a teacher over here who was teaching math. So really, if you got bored of listening to one teacher talk about math and you liked another one, you could actually just hone in on that teacher. They were teaching the same thing. It was great. Little did they know they were actually parallel teaching at the time. But, so that's how parallel teaching works. Sorry, let's go down. With Dion on the back, she's got, and she is teaching at this point in time, with a little bit more support over there, some really good visuals. And you can see she's provided with, for her students over there, the completed number line. Now with my students, I'm not. I'm just drawing a line, a number line up here and putting 0. So you see the difference? Now she's going to, like I said, she's going to give a little bit more support. We're going to have the same exact questions. We're not changing the questions at all. And so, did I even bring our questions over today?
You're just expecting one group to do more by themselves than the other group.
Exactly. I'm expecting this group to be a little bit more ready to go. And like I said, even though I'm going to have some special ed, during that time, what am I doing? I'm walking around, talking around, I'm leading them. I may even pair them up with somebody that they work well together. Dion's going to be doing the same thing. She's going to be walking around, talking around, doing those kind of things. And so our goal today was integers and their opposites. So let's say, in this case, our first number, and she may even provide these on the table. These are really good for our students that need it for integers. So, and I may not. So they understand that the red, in this case, is the negative numbers, right? And the other numbers are positive. And so they have that. Now, in our case, I'm just going to ask you to write on your thing a number line, similar to mine. And I want you to locate the number 4. So on your number line, locate where you feel the number 4 would be. Now, we're going to talk about what is the opposite of positive 4. And Dion's talking to her group saying pretty much the same thing. She's talking about the opposite. She's talking about where number 4 could be on the number line. She's marked it already, and she's going to color code, which I am not. So she's using color coding. She's using blue and yellow. Blue for the positive numbers, yellow for the negative numbers. Whereas, like I said, my group here, you guys are kind of just seeing it all in black and white in this case. So Dion's using blue and yellow. She's marked her 4 in blue, where, like I said, mine's just marked up here. And then I'm gonna say, what's the opposite of? So you guys, what's the opposite of 4? So -4, where would that be on your number line? Okay, so approximately the same distance, right? So we're gonna look at the same distance away, and it's -4. So that's how this is going to take place. So Dion talks to her students.
So I might talk to my students and I might say, first on your number line, on your desk in front of you, point to 4, show me 4. Okay, and then I'm gonna check for understanding with 4. Then I'm gonna say, can you show me what's the opposite of 4? All right, so then I say, okay, so let's see. Now, let's look at this, now hold that in your mind, and let's put that on our number line, right? So then I'm gonna say, let's find the number 4. How do I get to the number 4? Where do I start?
0.
0, so I'm gonna do what? I'm gonna maybe count up. So I've got tick marks on mine, right? I've got tick marks that have that visual that helps me. If I even need to, I can put marks, but I'm getting to 4, right? So you want me to just mark that above it, Steph, or?
Yeah.
Right there, okay? So then my kids can see that. So I'm having them do both a kinesthetic activity, so they have that in front of them, but I also have a visual. So we're talking about those modalities of learners in the classroom. So you guys, this group didn't really, those are more of your auditory learners. Those are the kids that have that abstract concepts of those numbers. But this group is kids that have the visual, or they need that kinesthetic piece. They have some kids that just gotta get up and move around. All right, and so we would do the same thing for negative. And how would I find the negative? If you're telling me that.
Backwards.
Okay, and where would I start at?
0.
So 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm teaching at the same time Stephanie is this whole thing. So we're looking here, and you all are over there looking at Miss Kidd.
And sometimes teachers tend to do this, they'll turn their kids back to back
All right.
so that this group is focusing on her and you guys are focusing on me. It could be that you are, you've got them in not really separated as far as that in the room, but they know who they need to be paying attention to because maybe the first 2 rows are with this person, the other 2 rows are with this person, and so they're doing that. And so there will be a little bit of movement sometimes in the room with parallel teaching. That happens. So a good example is our next one. I actually found my questions was in Alaska. Friday's temperature was -10. On Saturday it was -15. Which day was higher? And so we're going to look at you're going to go down onto your 3rd one there. So remember, what did I say Friday's temperature was? -10. So where would I put that on my number line? So we'll go over 10, right? So this would be -10. Now, and Saturday's temperature was? And so I'm going to go over again, correct? And so this is -15. Now, this is the really interesting part about negative numbers, right? Which one's larger, 10 or 15 when it's negative? -10. And how do you know that?
It's closer to 0.
It's closer to 0. And so I would just have that conversation with my students. We would model it. We would talk through it. I'm doing that walk around, talk around with them. You're doing the same thing.
Okay, so on Monday in Alaska, the temperature was -10. Let's find -10 on your number line. All right. Danny, what was your strategy for figuring out number 10?
I started at 0
Uh-huh.
and I counted over 10.
Okay, which
To
way
the
did you go?
left, to the left.
To the left, and what does that mean?
It's a negative
A
number.
negative number. All right. Ms. Chastity, did you find that number? Okay, you can check each other. Do you all both have your finger on that spot? All right. Now, let's look at that. Now we're going to transfer that to our board so that we all can see this. So how do we show -10? So what are we going to do? What's your strategy, Danny?
We're going to count to the left
Okay.
10 places.
All right, so I have to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right. So on the second day, the temperature was -15. look at, find negative 15 on your number line. Okay, so what was your strategy, Chastity, for finding negative 15?
Well, we were at 10 yesterday, and I knew that 15 is bigger than 10, and that when you're in the red, you have to keep going left. So I started at 10 and just counted. The next number was 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15, and I stopped when I got to 15.
Okay, so now, the question asks us, how do we know which number is bigger? Is that correct? So which number is bigger?
Which number is, yes, higher.
Higher.
What's the higher temperature?
What is the higher temperature? So that's the question we have. What is the higher temperature?
That's a good one. That could be tricky.
So you're right, Ms. Chasey. It could be a tricky question. So how would we solve that question? What would our strategy be?
Well, we know that the positive numbers are higher than negative numbers, so we know that.
Okay. So we know, okay. Okay. So we know that these numbers are bigger.
Mhm.
So that means, what do we know about these numbers?
So that those numbers are smaller,
Okay.
and so I guess the closer that you would get, you've underlined 0, so the closer that you get to 0 would be the warmer. So in this case, I'm going to say that even though that 10, the number 10 is a smaller digit, in reference to temperature, it's going to be warmer because it's closer to 0.
Right. Right. So we just mark that and we talk about it. Good strategy, good problem solving.
And so our next problem would be in February in Kentucky, Monday's temperature was 7 degrees and Tuesday's temperature was -3. So go ahead and on your number lines, mark that. And you can do
We can go ahead and do that. So -7.
She said 7.
7. It was 7. Monday's temperature was 7. And Tuesday's was -3. And you can just go ahead and be talking, and I'll talk to you.
Okay. So
Okay, so get with your partner and your A partner or your B partner and check and see if you have the same marks. Now the question for that is, which day was the higher temperature? Will you go ahead and circle that and talk to your partner? A, tell your partner why that's the higher temperature.
How do we know they're
The greater than 0.
So we need greater than
No, it's
zero.
not like
So which,
0.
so which temperature is the higher temperature?
And with all of our students, we talk about in depth too, which is we're going to be talking about a little bit later. But I talked to my.
So would we conclude, so what would
But
we
I'd rather be
conclude? The higher
$3 than
temperature
have $7
is
off
what?
whatever.
I've done the same thing.
7
Yeah,
degrees. So
now,
now,
they understand that. And with this being temperature, would you compare it to 3 degrees below the 0? Or would you have it be 7 degrees above the 0? Even though really it's not that big of a difference. It's still 10 degrees.
You can start using the number line less. And then once you transfer that from
Another question, what's the difference in
from
temperature?
having that
Negative
very
and
concrete, and you go to that semi-concrete line.
Absolutely. So see how we are teaching at the same exact times? This is what parallel teaching would be. So we would be teaching the same problems, same lesson, but different scaffolding going on in each lesson. So that's how we would do parallel teaching. The other thing about parallel teaching, and I had another example down here for our students, and they would just do A or E, which one's larger. And this is something that we could set up and at this point start bringing our students back together because she can do pairs, I can do pairs. We already know we're going to do this because we pre-planned it. They're going to do pairs and then we're going to come back together as a whole group and we would team teach this last section. So that's a good way for us to make sure. And then of course, which one of us or both could be walking around the room and progress monitoring or formative assessing where our kids are at that point. Did they understand the lesson? Is there more that we need to teach for the next day? So this is a good example, like I said, of parallel teaching that we can do. So, if you don't mind. Our next little section, does it not want to go on?
It's on that thing.
So, yeah, in this, I just kind of broke it down into what each one of us would be doing. So the special ed the regular ed teacher or the general ed teacher would be the one who is breaking the two groups up. She's going to be drawing a number line on the board that includes the tick marks and everything that may be needed to be included. She'd probably decide to do color coding at this point. I'm just drawing an open number line on my board. I'm going to request that all students draw the same type of number line. I'm going to do a comparison between some number lines, maybe do a double number line so students can see things. She's not. She's going to use the number line strips. Those kind of things will be going on for her to think. So we can sit down and talk about what is needed for each one of those students during that time. And of course, during that time, we're facilitating conversations, we're prompting our students to discuss it. We're also making sure that we're giving corrective and immediate feedback to as many students as possible. There's two of us. It's quicker time for me to walk over and put my hand on somebody and be like, I need you to look at that again. Tell me what you're thinking. I'm quick about that. I'm ready to go. And then, guess what? She's doing that same thing with those students. We've got this to where now he's getting immediate feedback. He's not done 6 of them wrong, right? And I'm having to reteach again because that's what happens when our students do an entire page that's wrong. One of the things with being able to do a team teaching like this is we are able to correct quickly.
And it significantly reduces the teacher-student ratio, right? So if you had a group here of 6 kids and a group of 6 kids here, or 12 and 12, you significantly reduce the number of kids to teacher-student ratio just by separating them in those 2 parallel groups. And so we know those groups would be fluid. Those groups wouldn't, you guys wouldn't be in the same group every single time. You guys wouldn't be in the same group every single time. But we would think about what the target is, and then what instruction we were delivering, and then how that would look in that classroom, what would best meet your need. So we still may have many kids that might need these these concrete, but maybe you don't need it for every section. So maybe you have a little better handle on fractions, but the positive and negative integers you might not as a student, right? So we can even as regular ed kids need some different things. I'm a visual learner, so I like to see visual supports, and I like to be able to see those things, so.
And in mathematics, one of the things I tell my teachers, please always allow manipulatives to be used at any point in time. I don't care when, if nobody else in the room is using them. If one student needs them, don't make it a stigma that they need them. Anybody can go to the shelf and grab the manipulative they need because it's just encouraging that learning. We're not worried about, as long as they're using them as tools and not toys, because that's what we talk to them about, these are tools. And so as long as you're using the math tools the way you need to, and you're progressing in your learning, there is nothing wrong with that. And it's okay. And when you set that example, it's not just the special needs kids who are using those tools. And the cool thing is, don't think that they're going to be a crutch for that student, because truthfully, they will wing themselves off of that tool. Sometimes they use them as a security blanket, and you'll see them, they'll go get that tool, they'll use it for the first 2 or 3, they realize they understand what they're doing, and then they just start working. That's okay too. So just keep that in mind, that tools are fine for our students to use. They should be available for our students to use and easily accessible. Can we flip to the next screen?
We'll try.
Okay, so another thing that Dion could have been using at this point in time, which we didn't show, was it's the frame routine. And so with a frame routine, we talk about all the things that are included, right, in what an integer is and how to compare those. So the students have that to go back to say, yes, this is an integer, this is not an integer, and those kind of things. So using a frame routine and basically doing the comparing parts for them already, they have that to look back to. And I really like using the framing routine for our students when they've got a vocabulary word that may be a little difficult for them, okay? That way, including the Frager model that they have this to go through and say, does it have this, and this? And then if it does, it's a check, yes, I've got it, kind of like our check sheets that we like to use. If it's got those things, then this is what I've got. So I like that framing routine for that.
one other point before we go into the next section that I think as we were thinking through this, really, as a participant, and you can drop this in the chat, or we'll talk about it out loud, but we talked through, but what kind of things did you all see when we're talking about the strategies that we used, when we're talking about co-teaching? We highlighted one particular one, but there were some other things that were happening. So let's talk about those. Does anybody have an idea what those might have been? There were three, at least three in that little model that we just shared. We kind of told it on.
You used color coding.
Mm-hmm. Right, we did. So that was a strategy.
Yeah, you used tick marks
Mm-hmm.
for counting.
Mm-hmm. That was an instructional strategy.
You had a graphic organizer.
Yep. So that was the use of a graphic organizer. Okay. So on your notes that we gave you for today, the structured notes, we're going to take just a minute. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes, and I want you to write on that structured notes page these three things. Or if you don't have your structured notes page, you just want to write these on a Post-it note, it's perfectly fine. But one, what instructional strategies did you see? 2, what was the role of the regular ed teacher? And 3, what was the role of the special education teacher during that example? Okay, so now that you've had time to think about it, think about what instructional strategies did you see? So Danny Paul mentioned a couple different ones. He was talking about using graphic organizers and using those models. What else did you see that we could share? And drop it in the chat, because we're talking about instructional strategies. So drop that in the chat, something that you noticed in the instruction.
Direct instruction?
Direct instruction. That's great. Thank you. And what? Visuals? Yeah, provided visuals. Absolutely. Absolutely. Anybody else think of something that they were able to see during that? And so those of you out there, let us know you're still there with us and share some of those strategies that you had. Okay, you've got
One of the things I remember you talking about, Dion, was the different modalities of learning, and where we were actually physically, we had something we could hold in our hands, and sometimes that's good for kids that learn through kinesthetic learning, and then of course the others, the visual and the graphic organizers.
So we use multiple modalities for learning, right? Scaffolding supports,
Yeah.
great, thank you. So Tracy puts on here, yes, providing strategies for different learners, absolutely, because we're trying to look at that learning style and model the, how we can meet the needs of those students, because we're teaching the exact same thing. Stephanie selected, she was using her curriculum map, and she was looking at the district curriculum pacing guide, and she knew where we were at on that pacing guide, and she made a decision about what that standard is, where they're at in the context of that instruction. And so we're having a conversation about that, right? Okay, this is where we're at, and this is what we need to be moving toward, but this is what we're going to do to build that, preparing students for that lesson. So we started out with a team teaching model, and we talked about, so I was using that, the vocabulary strategy, but modeling that for kids. Because, those kids, they saw that number line. You could have your kids use that vocabulary and create their own vocabulary notebook, regardless of the content area. You could be doing that for any of those social studies, because you're going to see examples of social studies. You're going to see example of that in reading. But what we want to know is that we all can contribute, because I'm not the math expert, but I was able to follow along with Stephanie, and I was able to listen to what Stephanie was doing to facilitate and have those and lead that group, so I was able to do that same thing with just a little bit of planning and preparation. So even if I'm not the expert in that content area, I can still be a contributor. We also did when I was walking around, we were both walking around. That's kind of like one teach, one observe, or one teach, one assist. However, one teach, one assist, and one teach, one observe are the two most highly used, the least effective strategies of all of the co-teaching approaches. But you use them in conjunction with one of the effective co-teaching approaches, then it can make a much more robust lesson.